Hello everyone, my name is AJ, and I don't have a good intro. Today I'll be redesigning Moxxie and Millie for my AU Heck of a Boss, which I've set in the 13th century. Starting with Moxxie, I wanted to start the main cast by designing Blitz, since I've got a really solid story idea for him, but since I want him to be a hybrid, I really ought to design the two species he's mixed with first. Blitz is from Greed, and I wanted to mix him with an imp from Pride, so I need to design both. Moxxie is also from Greed and is not a hybrid, so I'll knock two birds out with one stone by designing him first, which will get my head around what the species is supposed to look like. Then in the next video, I'll design Pride imps and Blitz. Blitz runs this little business called IMP, which stands for Immediate Murder Professionals. They take bounties from sinners to kill people that are still alive in the human world. There are 4 members: Blitz, Moxxie, Millie, and Luna. Blitz is the leader and kills people really good. Millie is sort of like the muscle and kills people really good. Moxxie is usually the butt of the joke and can kill people with a gun really good. And Luna is the angry one and can kill people really good. So it should be pretty obvious what the problem here is. This group doesn't have a huge diversity of skills. All 4 of these characters are just different flavors of the same skill set with slightly different personalities to make them feel like they're different, but they're not by much. This would be like making a D&D group out of nothing but barbarians. It's fun for a little while, but duplicates don't make for good chemistry. This applies both to personalities as well as to fun fight choreography and general usefulness. Since I'm designing characters specifically for a group, getting the group dynamic right is vital. Blitz has to be the leader, not exactly the brains behind the operation, but definitely the passion. Millie is going to be the main muscle, the main fighter. Luna, and I'm still trying to work out. I've got a lot of limitations with her that I have to overcome that'll make more sense when I get around to her. So, Moxxie. He really ought to be the most educated character. Not exactly the smartest, but intelligent. Book smart, but no common sense type character. I also need to replace the gun. The first gun was invented in China in the 10th century, but they didn't come to Europe until the 14th, which is beyond the scope of the show. They also weren't very good yet. Moxxie mainly uses a type of handgun from my recollection, which was also invented by the Chinese in the 14th century. So though guns do exist during our time period, it's not realistic for Moxxie to have one, so he needs something else. I was thinking that he would be really useful to the group if he was the only one that could use magic. That also gave me some ideas of how to change his background. In the original show, he is the child of a mob boss, but obviously the mob doesn't exist yet. The mob didn't start happening until Prohibition started in the 1920s. We'll replace the mob with a merchant family. This will also give us an opportunity to explore the greater world building of social classes and magic systems and the economy. I think it also makes a lot of sense for the merchants to be happening in the Greed ring specifically, because Greed is almost always the most prosperous ring until Mammon decides BPD doesn't exist and stops taking his potion. More money means greater ability for education. It's not uncommon for people at the bottom of society to consider education unimportant and prioritize work instead. So education for imps, though available in Greed, would only be completed by a small set of families that prioritize it enough to sacrifice their time, comfort, and regular meals in order to pull themselves out of poverty in the long term. The Greed ring is also the ring that is based most strongly off of European culture and history, so that also makes sense. Yeah. Moxxie's family was like this. Through generations of hard work and sacrifice, they pulled themselves out of peasantry into the merchant class. The merchant class was really starting to grow in Europe during the 11th century. Merchants were almost outside of feudalism, which was the economic system of Europe at the time. A lot of people confuse feudalism with capitalism, but they are very different. Feudalism has a very strong caste system determined by birth. Lords, also known as nobles, were in the middle. They would hold the land. Underneath them were the knights they employed to protect protect their land, and the peasants were below that. The peasants were the ones that worked in exchange to live on the land and receive military protection from invaders. It's a top-down system with very little economic mobility. The best you could hope for as a peasant was a benevolent ruler that employed knights that didn't suck. You could also become a knight if you were a man and could afford the training or the favor of your lord. Above the lords was the king, so here in Greed the hierarchy goes Mammon, the Goetia, a knight class I have yet to world build, and Corvin imps at the bottom. Merchants were kind of outside the system, like I said before. Mercantilism was a second economic system that started to develop in the 11th century and really exploded after the Black Death and eventually formed into capitalism. There was a lot more economic freedom in this system because how much wealth you had was determined entirely by how good of a merchant you were. Some merchants were wealthier than even some nobles. I have decided that Moxxie's family is a hyper-successful merchant family, enough so that they have their own land. The family business is moving raw materials, spices, and other goods from gluttony down to greed on the Silk Road. Now, the reason why the Silk Road was called that in real life is because silk textiles were one of the hottest trading goods. The reason why it's called the Silk Road in the Hecaverse is because it's a tunnel from gluttony to greed filled with giant spiders, so it's very dangerous. That's why all of the Moxxie family has to be skilled in magic. It's to defend from the giant spiders. I choked up my water. We will be taking some inspiration from the mob in the sense that Moxxie's family remained the biggest merchant family in Greed by violently removing the competition. That way they can keep their prices as high as possible. Let's talk design. Corvid imps. A long time ago, in which video I don't quite remember, I established that imps are a social class, not one specific species. I wanted to make a unique species for each ring. I wanted the imps of Greed to be crow-like or raven-like, cause crows and ravens like shiny things. I was thinking something kind of like a Kenku. I thought that like kobolds, I'd be able to track down the origins of Kenkus from D&D to real-life myths, but I couldn't find anything they were directly based on, and I couldn't find a crow entity that I liked within 2 minutes of Googling, so I decided to make my own. The family that ravens and crows belong to is a family known as corvids, and that family also contains magpies and blue jays. So I decided that my greed imps would be corvids to give myself a little bit more visual freedom when I'm designing. I decided on the black-beaked magpie for my main inspiration behind Moxxie's visual appearance and got to work. I wanted to keep his head and horns as identical to the original as possible. I had to trace in order to get the horns just right. They're just such an awkward shape and my brain can't wrap my head around them. For a body type, I went for more of a pear shape. There's a reoccurring joke in the original about Moxxie being fat, which obviously he looks the way that he does because he was designed by VivziePop, so I thought that I'd give him an actual pear-shaped body. Since he comes from money, it makes world-building sense that out of the main cast, he ought to have the most body fat, since he never had to worry about his next meal. He's probably not more than 5 pounds overweight, which is more like 15 for such a small animal, but his feathers give him some extra poomph to really emphasize the difference. The way that the jokes will be delivered, I do want to keep some of the chunky jokes, but the joke there about him being fat isn't a dig at his visual appearance, it's a dig at him being a rich boy. For clothes, since he's so covered in feathers, pants would just be awkward, so I decided to only give him a shirt. I was going to give him sleeves too, but I thought it would be cuter to give him back his wings as strictly a cover for his arms. He can't fly, but I think it might be cute if he could glide around with them, which would also give him a little bit more of a unique skill that would make him useful to the group. I want to keep wings that can actually be used for flying strictly to the higher classes of demons or demonic animals, so his only real clothing is a cape around his shoulders. I was going to give him a little vest underneath his cloak, but it's not period accurate, so I decided to make it patterning instead, since magpies have little white underbellies. I took his long forked tail off in favor of a plain old bird's tail. The original Moxxie has these 2 little tails at the end of his coat, which I was very happy to include them as a real tail to keep some of the silhouette parts there. Bow ties haven't been invented yet, and Moxxie's bow tie is a pretty prominent part of his design, so I included the grandfather of the tie, the cravat. It was intended to look lacy, maybe a little messy since he's rejected his life of luxury in favor of freedom, and it ended up looking kind of like a clown frill, which fits very well with greed, so I kept it. Since he uses a handgun instead of a bigger gun, I thought he would use a wand rather than a staff. Colors were a little bit of a challenge. I had to keep those black and white striped horns since all imps have those, so everything else needed to be built around that. I pulled up a rendered picture of Moxxie and color picked from that to find an off-white that I liked for his feathers, so there was some definition between them and the horns. I pulled a green off of the magpie. The magpie's colors are actually blue, but since they're iridescent, I was able to find a small pixel of green that I liked. I turned that green to a neon version of itself for use as a second color. I snatched a purple from my reference and I seriously considered keeping it. Moxxie was shown to have an envious streak in him in the camp episode that everyone hated. I think the reason why that episode is so cringe-inducing is because it feels really out of character for him. So I thought I would make envy a more prominent part of his personality in earlier episodes, so when we get to our equivalent, it will feel more like a welcome relief when he gets his character arc, as opposed to backtracking. Ultimately, I didn't like the purple and switched it out for a dark gray, which I also didn't like, so I made a greenish tint of a dark gray that I liked a lot. And there he is all done. One last detail I wanted to point out before we move on is the teeth. In the reference that I used of Moxxie, they were drawn as 3 little lines. I know that they're regular sharp teeth, but for some variety, I decided to keep them as tiny little needle teeth that you can barely see, kind of like Komodo dragon teeth. The purpose of the teeth is mostly just to open up the skin to expose it to diseases in the spit. Since Mammon's main weapon is the flesh-melting acid in his mouth, I think a disease-filled mouth fits very well for the creatures of his ring. Moving on to Millie. In the original, Millie is from a farming family in Wrath. In the original, Wrath has a Western cowboy theming to it. Obviously, we can't do this since the United States hasn't yet been discovered by white people, so there are no cowboys. I established in my Be a Myth video that Wrath is themed after Rome, and in my Sins of Pride video, I established that the specific type of imp in Wrath is kobolds. Kobolds have a few regional variants. The kobolds in my Pride video were Slavic and have traits associated with demons from that culture. The farther western kobolds are more traditionally draconic. They aren't considered dragons because they're too small and weak, but are too intelligent to be considered lizards and too evil to be dinosaurs, so imps. If they were an older, bigger species, they'd be dragons straight up. The political system of Wrath is very different from all of the other rings. All of the other rings have some sense of order and hierarchy. Wrath is mostly chaos, near anarchy. It's a revolving door of violent warlords constantly warring with one another for more territory or trying desperately to hold on to the territory they already have. Heck of a Boss is set before the exterminations were established in the way that we know them today. Instead of exterminations, heaven would just send the occasional plague or natural disaster by Lucifer's request. There's a lot of tension between sinners and non-human demons. Sinners can't be permanently killed except in these heavenly sent natural disasters, which makes them very annoying for Hellborn that can be killed. Sinners are also terrible people. They're lazy, they're violent, they're greedy, they stink, they're pedophiles, they ruin everything. Imagine a reality where the only immigrants that come into your nation are the ones that get rightfully deported from every single nation on the planet, and they never die, and they're stealing your jobs, and stealing your land, and stealing your women. They're awful. The only thing that both the upper classes and lower classes can agree on, even if that agreement remains unspoken, is that sinners suck. But there's nothing that anyone can really do about it. Sinners will come in either way no matter what happens. And there's a lot of financial incentive to keep shipping in more. It's the slave classes, like imps, that suffer the most from having too many sinners around. The upper classes are so far removed from the everyday problems of most of the population that they're completely ignorant or just don't care about the damage that sinners do to hell. They can afford to gaze down from their ivory towers and tell the population that sinners are good for the economy because it's not their kids getting diddled or their homes being robbed. Most of Hell's problems can be traced back to either the environment or to sinners. Hell has an embedded culture of evil because Lucifer has worked so hard to destroy the impulse control of humans so that he can own them, and once he has them, he casts them aside, not caring what they do to his world. And since sinners can do just about anything and get away with it, Hellborn do the same to survive. It's become an eat or be eaten type of world because Lucifer keeps flooding it with more and more predators. And that's not to say that Hell wouldn't have any problems at all without sinners around, other than the environmental ones. It still would. It's still a world full of demons, which are inherently evil, but it's a heck of a lot worse than it would have to be. Wrath is definitely the worst ring in terms of the sinner issue because Behemoth does very little ruling of her kingdom. She's incredibly irresponsible and overly emotional and rash about everything. She doesn't care about ruling, she just wants to do war for the sake of doing war. Her ring is in near total anarchy. It's like a zombie apocalypse there all the time, and the zombies being the animals, because they are awful too. Occasionally one little pocket of society will form for a little while, but it always gets destroyed after a bit. I brought up sinners to establish the reason as to why Wrath is more Roman-themed, and it's because the Romans were really good at war. At one point in history, they were the largest united empire in the world, and I fully believe that if a bunch of Romans rallied together in Wrath, they would establish a new Rome for a long enough time to make their dent on the culture before falling to ruin all over again. There's still a few spread out pockets of New Rome, but they are in serious decline and likely to fall pretty soon. I am keeping the idea of Millie coming from a large family. I think it would make a lot of sense if Wrath imps laid a lot of eggs because the life turnover rate is so high. Her family will be a family of farmers that work in one of those Rome pockets. On one hand, they're very proud of Millie for leaving and being free and somehow surviving amidst all the chaos and even thriving, but on the other hand, they resent her for the freedom she has that they don't. As far as appearance goes, I wanted to really make sure that she still looked like herself, which was a teeny bit more difficult since she's getting a snout when Moxxie's head shape didn't need to change too much. She's also got no more Western energy, not that she had a ton before, but you get the picture. I gave her a white tunic with a breastplate on top and some pauldrons. I connected the two armor pieces with a strap to mimic her overalls. Actually, I think that's just a shirt. I'm pretty sure that that's her midriff supposed to be showing, not a belt, so actually I don't know what those are, actually. I wanted to keep the ponytail from her past design since it would translate so well into the Roman mohawk on their helmets, but I decided against both it and a potential helmet. If she were to have a helmet, she would only use it on missions because those things are stupid heavy. I thought I would keep the armor overall pretty light. She is a small girl, and though stupid strong for someone her size, I would imagine her to be kind of like a glass cannon. Very strong, very fast, but she can't take hits for anything. She's got some armor on her forearms and legs, and the skirt is a strong leather, but that's it. No heavy plating, just the necessities. I put some spikes on the backs of the hands and the knees for some extra little nasties to contend with, then a scarf around the neck like Behemoth's to channel some of that Western energy. For her body, I kept things pretty simple. I gave her a slightly thicker tail, but didn't change much else about her body type, other than the obligatory clawed feet and hands. Her face was what got the most changes. I thought it would be cute if kobolds had shorter muzzles and bigger mouths like pit bulls. This is to channel more force into their bite, which otherwise wouldn't be that bad. Her horns and hair I kept the same. I did also decide to give her a little pony-like ear like Behemoth. While kobolds and Behemoth are not related in any way, I like the idea of the Sins sharing motifs with their subjects and biomes to keep the theming unified. A bit of an odder decision I made was in keeping Millie's teeth flat. I wanted to preserve the tooth gap, but the way that it was drawn in the original was messing with me, and it wasn't pronounced enough with the sharp teeth, so I went flat. I think this also gives them a bit of tasty horror to play with, since human teeth in a lizard pit bull's mouth in real life would be extremely off-putting. It pushes the idea that she's a demon, not just some cute furry, just a tad bit further. For colors, just like Moxxie, I wanted to be on the simple side. I wanted hers to be even more simple and muted than his, because he comes from greater wealth than she does. I made her skin a very muted orange, and then snatched the dark gray and bright yellow from the original. I took Moxxie's cream color from him as well, so they'd have a unifying color between them, which I thought would be very cute. A problem I've always had with Vivzi's work is the use of one-use colors. The yellow in the eyes of the imps is almost always a one-use color in every every single imp design she's ever made that I can remember. She uses the yellow eyes very frequently to the point where it feels like a character design take rather than something intentional. I always try to be very intentional with my character's eyes since they're so vital for expressions, and people will generally be looking at them a lot. I kept the yellow eyes for Millie, but to mix it up a tad, I gave her a thin black ring, a gray one, and a white pupil. I think this also adds to make her look a little bit more friendly and loving. It's a teeny bit less aggressive than the plain black eye that Vivzie always does. Circling back to what I meant to say though, I wanted to tie that yellow of her eye into other parts of the design, and did so by using it as an accent line. I also decided to put a block of black under the yellow so it acts as a decorative divider between the black and gray parts of the design, which on their own have lower contrast. The black underneath also serves to separate different parts of the outfit from one another that were previously the same color. The white parts of Vivzie's imp designs are usually there as scars, though sometimes they appear as freckles. I liked the idea of the white scars, and since Millie is a fighter and has been for a long time, I thought I'd give her plenty. Most of these are just nicks on the tail that were never that serious, and because they weren't that serious, it should hopefully subconsciously communicate to the viewer that she is a little bit delicate and scars easy. Millie uses this big scary axe in the show sometimes, and I really like it, so I kept it as her main weapon. I liked that it has just straight up a knife taped to the top. I changed its design a bit so it looks like it's chipped with age, and I took that stupid logo off. The business logo on the axe I think looks a little tacky and isn't in line with what businesses during this period of development would look like anyway. I instead made the center of it look like her eye, so it really feels like her weapon that she's had for forever, not the company weapon. And they are both done. I am very happy with them. I do have to admit, I'm not quite sure what to do with them story-wise. I would want Heck of a Boss to be a bit more episodic in nature, at least at first, until eventually a shift comes in the story when we go from slice of life but in hell shifts into, oh no, these characters have accidentally set in motion events that will change the course of history. Obviously, Blitz is the main character, so a lot of stuff has to revolve around him, but I think we've got some good setups here to start with that could make for interesting stories down the line, ripe with potential to explore politics and social issues. I don't mean modern politics and social issues, I find those deeply unappealing. I mean politics in the Star Wars prequels type way, where you get really immersed in the world and thought experiment your way through, what if this? And how would that realistically play out according to normal human behavior? I wanted to explore the guiding principles behind politics and social issues, and how those apply to worlds that don't exist. Overall, I'm very happy with these designs. I think it finally puts into perspective the difference between the different rungs of society. So far, I've only designed the Sins for my AU, and their designs are more detailed by their nature because they're above even royalty. It feels good to finally see the contrast between my simpler designs and my more detailed ones. The detail level is there to indicate status, and I think all that work has finally paid off. Anyway, I have merch, I take commissions on Ko-fi and Discord, and an extra special thank you goes out to my patrons, JRDS, CDN Redneck 05, Immortal Jesse, Mercer Scott Holt, Stephen Drake, The Fun Guy, Chase Johnson, Honey, QB, J Draws, and Silent Savvy. Thank you again so much for watching, and don't forget to politics all over the like button. Bye-bye!